It's midnight on a quiet, cold night in Arlington, Virginia. The streets are empty, save for the occasional car passing by, their headlights reflecting off the wet pavement. But then, a black SUV with Virginia plates rolls into view. Talia Porter, a woman who's done nothing wrong, finds herself being pulled over by two police officers. What should have been a routine traffic stop turns into something much darker. The officers, convinced that Talia is an easy target, don't know that they've just pulled over someone who isn't just an innocent civilian. Talia Porter is about to expose everything they think they've controlled. She's not just a victim in this scenario. She's a highly trained CIA agent, and her calm composure under pressure is about to turn the tables on these corrupt officers in a way they could never imagine. What follows is a chain of events that will uncover lies, corruption, and a conspiracy that reaches the very heart of the police department. But imagine this. You're framed for a crime you didn't commit, your freedom at risk, and the two officers who think they're in control have no idea who you really are. As the truth begins to unravel, everything you thought you knew about justice gets turned upside down. But wait, what if you could expose everything in a way that no one saw coming? What if the very person they've framed is the key to unlocking their darkest secrets? Talia Porter was no stranger to danger. As an experienced CIA agent, her job was about staying under the radar and outsmarting those who would try to hurt her or the country she served. But now, as she sits behind the wheel of her SUV, glancing at her watch, she has no idea that the routine stop she's about to face will spark a fight for her freedom. The officers are just doing their job, or so they think. They don't realize they're about to cross paths with someone who can bring them to their knees. The entire situation is about to spiral in unexpected ways, revealing how an innocent woman can become an unknowing target for corruption, and how one woman's resilience can bring an entire system crumbling down. As the officers approach, confident in their plan to make an easy arrest, Talia's mind goes into overdrive. She's been trained for this. She remains calm, but her instincts are screaming. The setup is too obvious. The bag of illegal substances, planted in her trunk, wasn't there when she left home. And now, these officers are about to accuse her of something that could destroy her. But what the officers don't know is that Talia's calm is far from weakness. Her CIA training is kicking in, and she knows the system she's about to play within. Every detail matters, every word spoken in the interrogation room, every move she makes from here on out will be the key to unraveling the corruption these officers are so sure they can hide behind. The deeper she's pushed, the more dangerous things get for the officers. They think they're untouchable, that they've planned this perfectly. But what they don't know is that there's a storm coming, and it's not just Talia who will be coming for them. It's the truth itself. The tension rises as Talia is taken to the station. The officers think they have the upper hand, but soon they'll discover that Talia's silent strength and steely resolve are about to tear their world apart. The truth is about to come out in a way no one expected. Talia's past, her connection to the CIA, her extensive training, all of it is about to come to light. The officers who framed her will not just be exposed. They will be forced to face the consequences of their actions in a courtroom where the real power lies in the truth. The night in Arlington, Virginia was still, almost eerie. The occasional car zipped by on the empty streets, their headlights cutting through the dark. But for the most part, the town was quiet, as if the whole world had decided to take a pause. Talia Porter, however, wasn't in the mood to rest. The day had been long, filled with meetings, surveillance, and tasks that only someone with her level of skill could handle. She'd spent years working in the shadows, uncovering secrets, infiltrating dangerous organizations, and keeping the country safe. As she drove through the quiet streets in her sleek black SUV, she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Her current mission in Arlington was nearing its end. She had gathered all the intel she needed, and soon she would be able to head back to the safety of her agency. But as she approached a quiet intersection, something in her peripheral vision caught her attention. A glint of light from the stop sign. Talia's eyes narrowed, her instincts kicking in. It wasn't fear that stirred in her chest, but a sharp awareness. She came to a full stop, her mind already working through the next steps. She had no idea what was coming, but something told her the night wasn't going to end the way she had expected. Out of nowhere, blue and red lights flashed in her rearview mirror. The sound of the siren screamed in the silence of the night, causing Talia to exhale slowly. She had been in enough high-pressure situations to know that staying calm was her greatest advantage. Without breaking a sweat, she guided her SUV to the side of the road and turned off the engine. She reached for her glove compartment, pulling out her license and registration. Her fingers were steady. This was no different than the countless other stops she'd experienced in her career. The officers who approached were nothing out of the ordinary. Two men, both in their navy blue Arlington Police Department uniforms, walked toward her car. Talia quickly noted their names as they came closer: Officer Brandon Carter and Officer Mark Sullivan. Both had the air of men who were used to power, their body language exuding authority and entitlement. "Good evening, ma'am," Officer Carter said, his voice rich with practiced confidence. He leaned down, shining his flashlight through the window, briefly illuminating her face. "Do you know why I pulled you over tonight?" Talia met his gaze coolly, her expression calm. "No, officer. I wasn't speeding, and I made a full stop at the intersection." Carter's smile was almost condescending as he nodded. "Actually, you failed to stop at that sign back there. That's a moving violation." Talia's brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't let the irritation show on her face. "I'm certain I stopped, officer," she replied, her voice even and measured. The officer's smile didn't fade. "License and registration," he snapped, his tone hardening. Without hesitation, Talia handed over the documents. As Carter examined them, his eyes lingered on her name and Virginia address. He glanced at her for a brief moment before returning his gaze to the papers in his hands. Talia wasn't sure if it was suspicion or something else that flickered in his eyes, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. As Carter examined the documents, Officer Sullivan, who had been lingering near the back of her SUV, suddenly called out, "Hey Carter, you might want to take a look at this." Talia's heart skipped a beat. She knew something was off, and as she watched Sullivan point toward something in the trunk of her SUV, she felt her stomach twist. She had been vigilant. There was no way the bag they were pointing at had been there when she had left her home. Officer Carter returned to her window, his expression shifting. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," he said. His tone was no longer polite. It was demanding. Talia held her ground. "May I ask why?" she responded coolly. "We have reason to believe you're in possession of illegal substances," Carter said bluntly. Talia's heart raced. This was no mistake. This wasn't a random stop. It was a setup. She remained calm, refusing to show the slightest sign of panic. "I think you've made a mistake," she replied softly. "Let's see about that," Carter said, gesturing for her to exit the vehicle. Talia opened the door slowly and stepped out. She didn't rush, her movements were deliberate. She could feel the tension rising in the air as Sullivan theatrically opened her trunk, lifting a small unmarked bag that was now sitting at the edge of it. "There it is," Sullivan said with mock surprise. "What do you know? A bag of powdery goodness." Talia's eyes flicked to the bag and then back to the officers. Her face remained unreadable, though her mind was already calculating the next steps. She knew that the bag hadn't been there when she left her house. This was no random encounter. It was a trap. Carter stepped closer, his smirk widening. "Anything you want to tell us, ma'am?" Talia let a faint, almost imperceptible smile curl at the corners of her lips, but it wasn't one of fear. It was calculated. "I'll save my comments for the appropriate setting," she said, her voice smooth and unwavering. Carter laughed, clearly misinterpreting her calm demeanor as arrogance. "You'll have your chance. You're under arrest for possession with intent to distribute." As Sullivan moved to cuff her, Talia allowed it without resistance. But there was no fear in her gaze. "You're making a big mistake," she said softly, her words carrying an intensity that made Sullivan hesitate for a brief moment before snapping the cuffs into place. The officers led her to the squad car, but Talia's mind was already racing. They thought they had trapped her, but she knew something they didn't. This wasn't just any woman they were dealing with. Talia Porter wasn't just a victim. She was about to show them that the game had changed. The clock ticked past midnight, and the town of Arlington lay under a blanket of quiet, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The hum of the streetlights and the occasional crackle of static from the patrol car's radio were the only sounds that broke the silence. Talia Porter drove through the winding suburban streets, her hands casually resting on the wheel of her sleek black SUV, her mind fully aware of the task ahead. She was used to this, used to the uncertainty, the quiet before the storm. Talia was an undercover operative trained by the CIA to blend in, to observe, and to strike when the moment was right. But tonight, she wasn't just doing her job. She was nearing the end of a long and painstaking investigation that could change everything. She had gathered the evidence, secured the intel, and now all she needed was a clean exit. But as she approached an intersection, a flash of blue and red lights shattered the peace, a siren blaring to life behind her. Talia's instinct kicked in immediately, and she didn't panic. She had been in much worse situations. With the calmness of someone who had faced danger 1,000 times before, she gently guided the SUV to the side of the road. The patrol car's headlights were the only illumination on the otherwise dark street, casting eerie shadows across the asphalt. Out of the patrol car emerged two officers, Officer Brandon Carter and Officer Mark Sullivan. The taller officer, Carter, walked toward her vehicle with a sense of purpose, while Sullivan, the stockier of the two, trailed behind. Talia's eyes locked onto their movements, her mind already calculating the best way to handle the situation. She noticed everything. Their posture, their demeanor, the faint shift in their expressions as they approached her vehicle. "Good evening, ma'am," Carter said, his voice laced with authority. "Do you know why we pulled you over tonight?" Talia kept her voice even, her expression composed. "No, officer. I wasn't speeding, and I made a full stop at the intersection." Carter didn't seem convinced. His lips curled into a slight smirk. "Actually, you failed to stop at the sign back there. That's a moving violation." Talia's brow furrowed slightly, but she kept her cool. "I'm certain I stopped, officer." Her tone was calm, firm, and unwavering. But the officers were already preparing for something much more sinister. They weren't concerned with traffic violations. No, this was a setup, and Talia could feel the tension in the air. She could see it in their eyes. They had already decided what they were going to do next. They were going to accuse her of something far more serious, and they were going to plant the evidence to make it stick. Moments later, Sullivan returned to the vehicle, holding up a small bag of powder from the trunk of her SUV. Talia's stomach twisted. She didn't have to look twice to know this was a setup. This wasn't her doing. This wasn't her possession. Someone had planted this. "There it is," Sullivan said, his voice dripping with mock surprise. "What do you know?" "A bag of powdery goodness." Talia's mind raced as she processed everything in an instant. She had been set up, and she wasn't going to let them get away with it. She remained calm, her voice steady as she spoke. "I'll save my comments for the appropriate setting." This small act of defiance seemed to infuriate the officers, particularly Carter, who now smirked. "Oh, you'll have your chance. You're under arrest for possession with intent to distribute." Talia allowed them to cuff her, her expression never faltering. The weight of the situation was only just beginning to sink in. She knew exactly what she had to do. This wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about exposing the corruption beneath the surface. The ride to the station was silent. Talia sat in the back seat of the squad car, her mind working through the sequence of events that had just unfolded. She wasn't afraid. Fear wasn't something she had time for. What mattered now was the mission. She had a job to do, and this was just another obstacle in the way of exposing the truth. When they arrived at the station, she was led inside, her mind alert to every detail. The fluorescent lights above flickered with an unsettling buzz. The officers were all too relaxed, going about their mundane tasks as though nothing was wrong. They didn't know who they were dealing with. They didn't know that the woman they had just arrested wasn't just any woman. They had just arrested someone who had the power to bring down everything they thought they controlled. But even as they prepared for their little victory, Talia remained calm. She had a plan. The tension in her mind was palpable as she waited for the right moment to strike. She knew how this would play out. They thought they had her cornered, but they had no idea that the walls they built would soon come crashing down. Inside the station, the officers were already gossiping about their big arrest. Carter and Sullivan were far too confident. They mocked her, thinking they had everything in place. But Talia knew they were overconfident, and that was their biggest mistake. The cracks in their facade were beginning to show, and she could feel it. She wasn't going to stay here long. She just had to wait for the right moment, and then everything would change. Meanwhile, a young officer named Keller couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He watched as Carter and Sullivan reveled in their success. But there was something about Talia's composure that didn't sit right with him. Something didn't add up. Keller was a rookie, fresh out of the academy, but even he could see that the arrest was too neat, too perfect. There was no way that everything was above board. His curiosity led him to dig deeper. He pulled up Talia's file and began scanning through her background. Something didn't feel right. He hesitated for a moment before deciding to take a closer look at the arrest report. As he read through the details, the unease in his gut grew. The story didn't line up. Keller knew that questioning senior officers was risky, but his conscience gnawed at him. The longer he spent in the station, the more the doubt began to take root. And soon, his internal struggle would lead him to make a decision that would change everything. Talia's silence in her cell was a study in patience. She had been here before, trapped in a system that was rigged against her. But she wasn't just going to sit idly by. She had a job to do, and she had to play her role until the moment was right. And when that moment came, she would expose everything. She would bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. As the hours slowly ticked by in the dimly lit holding cell, Talia kept her gaze steady and unblinking. She was calm, but beneath the surface, her mind was a whirlwind of calculations and preparations. She knew that the small, everyday interactions of the officers around her were more than just routines. They were the cracks in their system, the hints that would lead to their undoing. Meanwhile, Keller's internal struggle was intensifying. The young officer had always played by the rules, adhering strictly to the unspoken hierarchy within the police station. But something about Talia's arrest didn't sit right with him. The planted evidence, the calmness in her demeanor, none of it made sense. His mind replayed her words in the cell. That's what they're counting on. People like you to look the other way. She had seen right through him, and now Keller was left wondering if he had a choice in the matter at all. The more he thought about it, the more the weight of his conscience pressed down on him. Keller knew that turning a blind eye could cost him more than his career. It could cost him his integrity. So, despite the dangerous path ahead, he made a decision. He would do something about it. He would expose the truth, even if it meant going against the very officers he had trained with. Late into the night, as the station buzzed with the usual hum of activity, Keller made his move. The break room was empty, the coffee cups left half-finished on the counter, and the sound of the door to the records archive clicking open echoed through the quiet hall. Keller moved with purpose, logging into the system, searching through files, pulling up case after case tied to Carter and Sullivan. The evidence was overwhelming. Every single report was eerily similar to Talia's arrest. He paused, realizing that the arrests made by these two officers weren't isolated incidents. This was a pattern, one that had likely been going on for years. With trembling hands, Keller started compiling everything: the arrest reports, the filed complaints, the discrepancies in evidence. His mind raced as he realized the scale of what was unfolding. This wasn't just about Talia's case anymore. This was about exposing a deeply rooted corruption within the department. He attached everything to an email, including a message for whoever would be reading it. Something's wrong here. I don't know who to trust, but I can't stay silent. Please help. He hit send, not knowing who would receive it, but hoping that someone, anyone, would take notice. As the hours dragged on, Keller paced near Talia's cell. His internal conflict had reached its peak. Just as he was about to walk away, he felt a shift in the air. It was subtle, but it was there. He glanced up, meeting Talia's gaze through the bars. For a moment, their eyes locked, his full of doubt, hers full of quiet certainty. I sent the email, Keller finally admitted, his voice low and shaky. Talia nodded slowly, her face unreadable. Good. Now you've done something that matters. She let her words hang in the air, knowing exactly how much weight they carried. Keller swallowed hard, taking a step back. He didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in his short career, he felt like he had chosen the right side. Back at the operations room, the man in the tailored suit sat still, his eyes fixed on the monitor in front of him. The email had arrived just as expected. Talia's team was already mobilizing. Within minutes, agents in sleek black suits had been dispatched to the station. They would work from within, dismantling everything quietly, piece by piece. It was time for the storm to hit. The next morning, the station was bustling with its usual routine. Officers in uniform shuffled through the hallways, exchanging quiet chatter over donuts, while the coffee pot bubbled away in the corner. But beneath the surface, everything was different. The air was thick with anticipation, a storm building just beyond their comprehension. Keller, now visibly shaken by the email's impact, couldn't help but glance at the door to the interrogation room. He knew something was about to change. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. The tension was unbearable, and the truth was closing in on the officers who had wronged Talia. Then it happened. The door to the station opened, and in walked a group of FBI agents, their black suits sharp and purposeful. They moved with calculated precision, their badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights as they swept through the room. Keller froze, his heart pounding as he watched the agents approach the front desk. "Federal investigation," one of the agents said, his tone clipped and commanding. "We need access to your records and holding cells immediately." The desk sergeant, a burly man with a gruff demeanor, hesitated, clearly thrown off by the unexpected arrival of the federal agents. "What's this about?" he asked, his hand instinctively moving toward the radio on his shoulder. The agent's expression didn't change. "We're here to investigate corruption within the station. If you're not prepared to cooperate, we'll take this elsewhere." The sergeant, visibly uncomfortable, gestured for the agents to follow him. Keller, still stunned, watched as the scene unfolded in front of him. He could see the cracks in the officers' composure. Carter and Sullivan had been so sure of themselves, so certain they had everything under control. Now the tables were turning, and they didn't even know it. Inside the interrogation room, Carter and Sullivan sat across from Agent Price and his team. The room was tense, the silence deafening as Price laid out the evidence against them. Photographs from the station's security cameras, audio recordings, and digital files that exposed everything. The officers' smug confidence began to crumble as the weight of the evidence settled on their shoulders. "We've pulled records from your past arrests," Price said, his voice sharp and unwavering. "Your pattern of planting evidence and falsifying reports is undeniable. And this—" he slid a folder of photographs onto the table. "This is just the beginning." Carter, trying to maintain some semblance of control, leaned forward, his bravado fading. "That doesn't prove anything," he muttered, his voice cracking under the pressure. Price raised an eyebrow. "Really? These timestamps don't lie. We've got you on tape, Carter. You've been framing innocent people for years, and we have all the evidence we need to make sure you never see the light of day again." Sullivan, once cocky and self-assured, now looked like a broken man. His face turned pale as the full scope of the investigation hit him. "We were just doing our jobs," Sullivan stammered, his hands shaking. "We didn't think it would get this far." Agent Price leaned back, his expression hardening. "You didn't think, that's your problem. And now you'll have to face the consequences." Meanwhile, Talia sat in her cell, fully aware that the storm she had been waiting for was now crashing down on the corrupt officers. She knew her team had done their part, and now it was only a matter of time before the entire truth came to light. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person who had been wronged by men like Carter and Sullivan. Minutes later, the door to the cell opened, and an agent stepped inside. "Miss Porter," he said, his voice calm but respectful. "You're free to go." Talia stood slowly, her movements deliberate and measured. She had been through this before, but the feeling of walking out of that cell, knowing that justice had been served, was something she would never take for granted. As she walked past Keller's desk on her way out, their eyes met. She gave him a quiet nod, a silent acknowledgement of the risk he had taken. For the first time in his career, Keller had done the right thing. The case was over. The corrupt officers were caught, and the truth had finally been set free. The courtroom was silent, the weight of the truth hanging thick in the air. Talia Porter had entered that place under false accusations, her fate seemingly sealed by the dirty hands of two corrupt officers. Yet, in a matter of hours, she had transformed from a woman trapped in a fabricated lie to the harbinger of justice. The very people who had orchestrated her downfall were now being dragged through the consequences of their own actions. But the victory didn't end there. It wasn't just about exposing two bad cops. No, this was about a larger battle. It was about systemic corruption, about the abuse of power, and about one woman's quiet but unwavering stand for what was right. Talia's victory wasn't just personal. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been wronged by those who believed they were untouchable. Her actions would ripple through the entire police department, shaking it to its very core and bringing real change. But what happened next, after the dust had settled? As the headlines screamed of the officer's disgrace, of Talia's triumphant rise from a false arrest, many people began to see the deeper story. They saw how one person's determination could topple an empire of lies. They saw how Talia's decision to stand firm, to never back down, had forced the truth to the surface. In that moment, justice had not just been served. It had been embodied by the quiet resilience of an agent who had refused to be silenced. Her actions didn't just bring down two corrupt officers. They exposed the very structure that had allowed them to thrive. Talia Porter had done what few could do. She had peeled back the layers of deception and revealed the ugly truth beneath. As the media buzzed with the fallout, with news stations airing footage of the two disgraced officers being led away in cuffs, the conversation shifted. The focus was no longer on Talia's background or the secrets she held but on the deeper implications of this moment. It wasn't just a tale of revenge. It was a story of redemption. It was the reminder that no matter how powerful the oppressors may seem, truth always finds its way to the surface. Yet, there was still more to this journey. While the arrests were celebrated by the community, there was an undeniable truth that lingered in the back of Talia's mind. This was just the beginning. The fight for justice didn't end with a single victory. It was an ongoing battle, one that required constant vigilance. There would always be those who tried to manipulate the system, those who believed they could play God with the lives of others. And Talia, even as she walked away from the courtroom, knew her work was far from over. Her future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She had proven to herself and to the world that one person could make a difference. The choices she had made in that small, dimly lit courtroom had not only exposed the corruption of two officers but had set the stage for a broader reckoning. Talia had become the symbol of resistance against systemic injustice. She wasn't just a woman seeking redemption. She was a force to be reckoned with. And so, as the days passed, the ripple effects of her actions began to spread. The police station underwent a massive overhaul. Officers who had once turned a blind eye to corruption now found themselves reevaluating their roles. Talia's name remained unspoken, her identity shielded by her team, but her influence was undeniable. Change had begun, and it was because of her quiet determination to fight back. The world would know her actions, if not her name, and the lessons she had taught. In the quiet moments after the storm, Talia found solace in knowing that justice had prevailed. Yet, she remained vigilant, understanding that the fight for true justice was never over. She had done what needed to be done, but she knew that there would always be more battles on the horizon. One thing was certain: the system would never be the same again. In the end, it wasn't about the false accusations, the corruption, or the officers who tried to bury the truth. It was about the people who, like Talia, refused to stay silent, who stood up against the lies, who fought for a better world. The victory of the truth was not just for her. It was for every person who believed in the power of righteousness, for every person who ever doubted that one individual could change the world. And with that, Talia Porter walked away from the wreckage of her enemies, knowing that in the end, justice had been served, not because of the badges of authority, but because of the courage of one woman who had dared to expose the truth. Thank you for watching this powerful story of justice and truth. If you've been inspired by Talia Porter's journey and the lessons we've learned along the way, don't forget to hit that like button. Your support helps us share more stories like this with the world. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more gripping tales that inspire, challenge, and awaken the power of truth. And remember, the fight for justice doesn't end here. Share this video with your friends and family. Let's keep the conversation going and spread awareness of how one voice can truly make a difference. We want to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and join the discussion. Stay tuned, and see you in the next one. Together, we can make the world a better place, one story at a time.